You're preparing for the technical software engineering interview and you're told one thing, and that's to just practice as many technical questions as possible. I mean programming questions like writing code. What is the problem with this? You do this until you're very comfortable with mediums and hard problems, but then you get to a technical interview and you just are stumped. Or you just want to work in the tech industry as a software engineer or in a role that has technical components in the interview for that specific role. In this video, I'm going to go over step by step how you can prepare for the technical interview, whether it's this week, next month, or later this year if you're just starting your preparation. My name is Vert and this is The Commute because it's time to go to work. I mainly talk about working from home as a software engineer, personal finance, or life. So if you need a ride, obliterate the like button and the subscribe button. I've been through many technical interviews, and a lot of them were very unique experiences. Some good, some bad. But the things that are consistent is the preparation and the aspects of the interview. The first thing I want to go over is the interview timeline. A successful interview starts way before the actual interview itself, and you might be here because you're preparing for one today, tomorrow, later this week, or next month. It's okay. You're probably here because you've done some preparation or none at all. Again, it's okay, because whether or not the interview dates are in a month or 6 months from now, majority of the time is going to be practicing, and I'm going to be talking about the core resources that I can suggest to you to get that done. In the 1 to 3 months leading up to the interview, you're most likely going to be working on side projects or practicing problems to lock down key concepts like data structures, algorithms, or even specific technologies if the positions that you're applying for entail them. Along with that, you're going to want to do some mock interviews so you can practice questions in a similar environment to the interview. You can do that by yourself, or even better, you could do it with a peer, and I'll talk about some resources to get that done as well. You'll want to practice technical questions similar to like if you were training for a sporting event. Think about it. If you're a basketball player, you're not going to play your first game without having to condition or learning how to shoot a free throw. Or you wouldn't go into a dress rehearsal or a performance where you're doing theater without actually rehearsing beforehand. Practice potential interview questions to get used to them if you haven't already done so. During those 1 to 3 months leading up to that, or even before that, you're going to want to start preparing your resume. It's a totally separate aspect of preparation, but it is key to your success in the interview itself because you might be asked a question about your resume. During the week of and the day of the interview, you're going to be in the groove of understanding how to approach your technical problems, knowing what is on your resume and your experience, as well as understanding key concepts. So now with the timeline defined, let's go over some resources that I personally really like and I think is the most optimal way to prepare for your technical interviews. But before I go into those resources, comment down below if you have any resources that you personally like or know about to prepare for your technical interviews. The first resource is definitely one that you should bookmark on your bookmark bar almost immediately, and that is bigocheatsheet.com. There are multiple ways to code a solution, and when you're answering your questions in a technical interview, there are good ways, there are also bad ways. This website has all the common data structures and their associated common operations, the performance of them, as well as any algorithms associated as well. Memorizing every single piece of this cheat sheet is not necessarily necessary, but it's really good to know it like the back of your hand. I mean, knowing the difference between linear time and logarithmic time is definitely a key thing when you're answering your questions. The next resource I have is pretty much like the religious teachings of technical interviews, and that is Cracking the Coding Interview, or CTCI. It goes in depth into the technical interview as well as behavioral interviews. It has a load of questions, and it goes even into how you're evaluated as a candidate throughout the process. This is a book I've personally used for the last decade, and I used it throughout college. I used it to get my first internship as well as my first job out of college. I used it in the process of interview prep to get my new job now, and for any new job in the future, if I decide to go into interviews, I'm definitely using this. Like, I've marked certain questions that I really liked or that I find particularly difficult just to get like a refresher, or if I've even come across it in an interview myself through a company. Now, there are so many websites out there that have huge libraries of technical questions to help in your preparation. I know about LeetCode, HackerRank, InterviewBit, InterviewCake, as well as other programs that are kind of like boot camps to help you in your preparation too. Of those, I personally really like LeetCode. I believe this came out right after I graduated college, but the question bank is huge and it keeps growing. I've also tried out LeetCode Premium, where I paid a subscription for a couple months when I was preparing to get like different filters or see what companies use certain questions. But the free version is good enough too, because you really just want the question itself, practice it, and you could find solutions online that people share on their GitHub. So I mentioned this earlier in the timeline where during those months and weeks leading up to the interview, you should definitely do some practice mock interviews. A resource or website that I like to do my mock interviews is called PRAMP, and it stands for Practice Makes Perfect. I've tried this service a couple times where basically you sign up on their site, you get I think 5 free interviews where you can go on there, check out like a Calendly or a calendar kind of link where you can set up an interview for either behavioral or even a technical interview. You get that set up and then they basically provide you with a calendar invite where it has a Zoom link that you join someone else who's also trying to do a mock interview. Since the world is what it is today, a lot of interviews are virtual, and this basically gets the anxiety of going into an interview without actually being in front of the person. The interface is really great. So basically if you're used to Zoom, and I'm assuming you would be if you're either in school or you're interviewing or you're working yourself too, you're set up with a meeting, you go in there, and then through the website interface, you have a set of questions that you ask each other. I believe the time allotted is an hour, so you take 30 minutes with your questions and then 30 minutes for the interviewer to ask their questions, but I believe you can stay on there for as long as you like if you want to go into not just the questions, but like interview tips or talking about your experience. The awesome part about it is because you're interviewing with someone else but not trying to win them over to hire you for a job, you're basically there for the same reason. You're trying to get better at interviewing, and you can share your goals, you can share the companies that you've interviewed at, all those kinds of things if you want to. I've personally met some really cool people through it, like not just in the United States, but all over the world, trying to get technical jobs and just trying to better themselves in the interview process. Another resource that I find useful for mock interviews, but also networking and connecting with people, is Discord servers. I'm sure you could search for a bunch of them, but some of them I've come across either online through Google or on Reddit, but one particular one is the System Design Discord, where I was able to gain access to it by reading the System Design book. Point is, there are communities out there that can help you with your interview prep, and there's other people in those same things, but there's also people part of these communities who have been through it and willing to give you advice. And the last resource I will personally suggest is called Educative. Now, it is a subscription service where it's a website full of a bunch of learning courses, curriculums, and all that, and different tracks to learn like coding languages. There's specific ones for interviews as well, and those are the things that I've personally done. Now, it's not free, but I found it very useful because it's not just videos, it's not just blank pieces of paper. It's an interactive website where you read through a process or you read through a concept, and then you get to code some problems and solutions where it checks you on them. The funny thing is when I was interviewing for jobs out of college, I still didn't really know my core concepts that well. I just understood enough to get by, but I really liked this site to where if I needed to find out about my common data structures and algorithms, or even the more complex ones, this site has it and I can refresh myself on it each and every time, or I learn something new. So those are all my resources that I have to suggest. And the next thing we should talk about is your resume. The reason why the resume is so important to know about in an interview, especially the technical one, is the interviewer might ask you some questions on it or ask questions that are tailored towards those things. The reason why I include mentioning this is because each and every single interview, whether it's behavioral but specifically technical interviews, I'm always asked a question about maybe one point or a whole project that I put on my resume. At one of my previous employers, I had extensive experience in Elasticsearch, which is a very specific technology for, well, search. And in a couple interviews, I was asked questions on my experience with Elasticsearch, like indexing the Elastic API, querying, or even cluster management. Basically a bunch of terminology on Elasticsearch itself. But the point is you should definitely know the things you put on your resume and not just to pass through some automated screening to get a job interview. The resume should showcase your achievements and not just your role and responsibilities that you might have been told from before. Interviewers like to see what you've done through what you have been able to achieve, whether that's in a project, launching a website, or what you've accomplished at a previous role. If you haven't had any job, it's hard to say that you have any achievements, but understanding concepts or learning a new concept or going through a course where you get a certification, that is also an achievement. So you prepared for the interview, you applied for some jobs, you have a resume out there, and now you have a technical interview coming up. Let's talk about the aspects of a technical interview, just so that's also part of preparing for that interview. Usually there's a short introduction where you talk about yourself and then the interviewer talks about them as well. They have a couple questions about your experiences, maybe on your resume like I just mentioned, and then maybe 1 to 3 questions that are technical in nature with also follow-up like, what is the big O notation of this algorithm that you just coded? Keep in mind those data structures and algorithms, as well as the key concepts that you've done in your preparation. You might even talk about specific technologies as well in those technical questions. When you approach these technical problems, the interviewer is going to look for a few things, like if you're going to just start coding or you're going to take a step back, think, and maybe ask some follow-up questions to solve or clear any ambiguity for the question that they presented you. As subjective as the technical interview is, these are pretty consistent when the interviewer is looking for specific things during the interview. Not all the time are you going to solve the technical problem. I mean, it's a good thing that you do, but it's really how you solve the problem that they're looking for. Like you're communicating, you're asking questions. Basically, how would it be like if they were working with you as a peer or as an engineer? The timeline is usually a month to 3 months out where you're basically practicing questions, preparing your resume, and doing mock interviews. The week of and the day of are the same thing, just verifying you're consistent in your practice as well as the day of. Also, just take a deep breath. You've done so much preparing for this interview that you have to have a clear mind when you go into it. I mentioned a bunch of resources as well, but the key ones are Cracking the Coding Interview and LeetCode for just a question bank of a bunch of technical questions, as well as Pramp for your mock interviews. I also talked about the resume, where if you're preparing that, that's going to get you the interview itself, but knowing it is going to help you in the interview as well. And we talked about the interview. These are the steps that I followed and planned out for my interviews when I was looking for a new opportunity most recently. And you can honestly prepare for interviews in any other way, but this was a step-by-step approach on how to prepare for technical interviews. If anything, this is just a foundation on the things that you should be doing minimally, and anything else is just a value add. If you can hyper-focus on just these foundational things in your technical interview preparation, I'm sure you'll be able to pass your next technical interview. With that said, the commute is over, so destroy the like button and consider subscribing for more videos about working from home as a software engineer, personal finance, and life. Check out the links below, find me on Instagram, and I hope you'll come to work with me next time. Bye! Boom, boom. All right. God, my hair is so messy. Anyways.